to be going out across the internet because we're just waiting
Yes.
for Facebook to
No swearing.
catch
Yeah,
up.
yeah.
No swearing.
Oh, but now all I can think of are offensive things
Yeah,
to say.
exactly.
Well, you
Get
can-
it all. I would say get it all out now, but don't
You can
because.
say offensive things
we're
without
streaming.
actually swearing. You're good at that.
All right, we are live. Hello, thanks for joining us. As you can see beside me, we have author Margaret Atwood and Sarah Polley, the writer and producer of, I'm sure you can see the sign behind us, Alias Grace. I have spent a wonderful morning meeting the producer, the director, and the actors of this new miniseries coming soon to Netflix and CBC. But we are going to take a few minutes here on Facebook to explore the genesis, and also we like to hear from you on YouTube, on Facebook, about what it means to you, your vision for Alias Grace, and maybe what you're expecting. I have to start with Margaret's moment. You seem to be everywhere now. You just came from a presentation in a train station where they're reading your books. There's going to be an audible book of Alias Grace. Elizabeth Moss is performing segments from Handmaid's Tale. How does it feel to be, I don't know, I mean, just out there in the popular culture in such a large way right now, Margaret?
How tactful of you. Not to say at your age.
No.
You mean, how did I crawl out of the grave and reappear in this amazing way? It's been going on all along, of course. Handmaid's Tale never went away, but it got suddenly reframed on November the 9th after the Trump election.
Of course.
However, the fact that both of these things are happening in this year is a coincidence.
Yeah.
Sarah has wanted to make this since she was 17. And the showrunner of The Handmaid's Tale similarly has wanted to make it since he was 19. So I guess we had to wait for them to be old enough to actually do it.
It's a generational thing. You
It's
planted
partly
these
a
seeds
generation,
and
yeah.
they're bearing fruit.
So people tried to make Alias Grace earlier. In fact, Kate Blanchett wanted to make it,
Really?
but then she got pregnant. What can you do? So everybody who reads this book gets no, they don't. So that happened, and with Handmaid's Tale, I think it's the arrival of the new multi-episode streaming platforms that has facilitated. Similarly with Alias Grace, Sarah first wrote it as a feature film, but it was too big to get stuffed into 90 minutes. She felt she was losing too much, so we had a meeting at which she thought I would be shocked and horrified if she said, "Can we make it into a 6-part miniseries?"
Yeah.
Yes.
I can see how it lends itself to the format because it's kind of a beautiful slow burn of storytelling that you do, like every time it ends you want to keep going. But Sarah, I want to start with you. Let's go back to the younger Sarah. So you're making your way up in Hollywood, kind of still an actor, activist, other things. What was it about Grace that fixated you?
I think it was the inability to ever get to the bottom of her, to ever really figure her out. I kept reading it over and over thinking I would arrive at some answer, and that answer never came. So it was a process of peeling back the layers and peeling back the layers, and I think that it raised a lot of questions for me about myself. I think that the best books or pieces of art, things that really impact you in your life do. I think there's some personal connection to it that you don't really have words for. I think that's when things affect you the deepest. They're on a level that you don't completely understand. So there's that, but it was also looking at a period of Canadian history that I was fascinated by, the 1837 rebellion and its aftermath, which this takes place in. And at the time I was a political activist, and that was most of my life at that point. So finding out that there actually had been a revolution here was so thrilling. Because, we've sort of lost that part of our history. And I think just the intricate details of that period and the way Margaret painted every tiny, painstaking detail of life back then for a domestic woman and an immigrant like Grace, I just couldn't get it out of my head. I thought it was the most fascinating book I'd ever read. So
And now with the production, Sarah Gadden was telling us how she went into kind of Victorian boot camp where she had to learn how to dress, how to do all of these tasks. I do want to mention there's been some questions about the annoying growling sound you're hearing in the background. We are in a hotel in Toronto. We can't control everything. There appears to be, I would describe it as drilling. I have no idea. We're trying to...
Are there actually questions coming to you?
Yeah, oh yeah, no, because now they're, more distracted
actually
about, like,
getting-
why is there this ridiculous
Okay,
sound?
it's a new hotel.
Yes,
And
evidently you're
it
still
just-
building it.
They're putting the finishing touches
Yeah.
on, but they've been very nice to us,
They've been lovely.
and you should mention their name.
It's Beecha, right? The hotel.
Yes.
So, yes,
And
it's lovely.
So they are being very lovely, but they haven't quite got the part that we can hear them doing.
That we're broadcasting the live interview while they're
Yeah,
assembling parts of the suites.
Never
Let's
mind,
move
never
on.
mind.
We have a brief moment of silence. I find it so fascinating how Alias Grace kind of addresses all the various gazes now and how women are perceived and the various graces that you can see and watch in this series and kind of make up your own mind. But for you, what was the starting point?
Okay, the starting point was that back in 1961-2, when I was a graduate student, I couldn't get into Lamont Library at Harvard because women weren't allowed in.
Really?
That's where the modern poetry was. So I couldn't get into Widener Library and go into the stacks, where I, of course, immediately headed for the witchcraft and demonology.
Of course, why?
section,
Yeah.
because I was doing the 17th century in America, not unconnected with the Handmaid's Tale.
Mhm.
And right next to that, there was a section of Canadian literature that somebody had been collecting. And in it was Susanna Moody's Life in the Clearings. And that had the story of Grace Marks in it, which I was pretty riveted by. And I put it into the journals of Susanna Moody because
Mhm.
Susanna High-Hose often visits the lunatic asylum.
Mm-hmm.
So her visit to the lunatic asylum is in there. And then I was asked to do a television play by George Jonas. He commissioned for, this is early days
Mhm.
of black and white CBC television. So I did the story of Grace Marks as told by Susanna Moody at that time, in which Grace was guilty and she put him up to it, and it was
Yeah.
all her fault because Susanna Moody would much rather write a story in which a woman was an agent than one in which he was just a hapless
Right.
bystander. So she made her the center of it, and she got everything wrong. She got the time wrong, the place wrong.
The name's wrong.
The name's wrong. So,
Oh.
but then I forgot all about that, and I went off, and I was in Zurich, as one is.
As one is.
As one is. I was in Zurich, and I started writing on the hotel notepaper, as one does. And the scene that I wrote was the first couple of pages of the novel, and I thought, what is this about? And I thought it must be about Grace Marks, and she was not satisfied with what I did
Mhm.
previously. So then I went back into the microfiche newspapers of the time and found all of this other material. And it was just like one of those crime cases today in
Mhm.
which there are two people involved, one a man, one a woman. The man is always guilty, but the woman is always divided opinion.
Yeah.
Was she a hapless bystander? Did he force her? Did he threaten her? Was she the instigator? Did she egg him on?
Mhm.
Or think of the O.J. Simpson case.
Of
There
course.
were very divided opinions. All that was going on at the time about Grace.
Mm.
There were also a lot of discrepancies in the stories people were telling. So
It's amazing when your characters speak to you like that, where kind of
Yeah, well,
she's
I-
pushing back.
she's pushing back, and there was a so-called confession by her, but who knows
Mhm.
what it was really. So I wanted to write a book in which all possibilities were present.
Well, we have a
Because
question.
we never knew. We
Mhm.
never knew. 4 people in the house, 3 dead. Only one person knew what had really happened, and that was her, and she never told.
And it's that ambiguity that
Very
makes
ambiguous.
it so, I mean, everyone sees it differently, which brings us to a question from Paul Salvatore, who asks, Sarah, what is the hardest part of writing to translate all of this wonderful ambiguity into a fixed screenplay? Or how do you retain that ambiguity?
So hard to do.
It's hard to do. So, what was helpful was before I started writing, I sat down with Margaret for a very long meeting, about 4 or 5 hours, and I asked her, what is the thing that's most important to you that gets retained in this adaptation? And without a hesitation, she said the ambiguity. And it was really helpful to have her say that to me, because I knew that was going to be the thing I had to fight for. That every meeting I would have with anyone about the script, they would want to know the answer, and they would want to have a conclusion.
Yeah.
But if I had in my back pocket, Margaret Atwood will be mad at me if I answer that question, everyone was going to back off. Nobody wants to make her mad. So that was very helpful. In fact, I think I'll use it for future projects that are not adaptations of her works. I'll just have her say what can't be meddled with. It's really helpful. So that was good, because it was the one thing I knew I had to protect. So that made it easier to do, because it was the focus in writing every scene. But it is hard. And what I hope mostly when people come out of it is that people have very different opinions, and I've noticed they do. I mean, there are arguments after we have screenings of this of, how involved was she? How uninvolved was she? Who was she? What did she mean? When was she lying? Was she lying at all? And I've noticed that people tend to project what they think onto it and their own experience, and feel very committed to it.
As at the time.
As at the time.
She had a big fan club that kept trying to get her out, which is what where the Dr. Jordan comes in, and where the Reverend played by David Cronenberg.
Yes, David Cronenberg.
And there were all of these letters that were written on her behalf. Unfortunately, somebody at the National Library threw them out. But we knew that they had been written and had existed, and people were writing about anti-Grace people were writing about all these idiots and fools who were supporting her and thinking she was innocent. So that debate was going on at the time, and it kept going on throughout the century. People kept going back and revisiting it. You've got these journalists who would say that they'd been to the States and had an interview with her. I disbelieve them, but they were continuing to use it as material.
It gives a very modern aspect to this Victorian
Completely.
tale.
Well, the woman question was front and center in the 19th century. People were arguing for or against, and that went on throughout the century. And also Irish people were front and center, because not only did you have the famine in the middle of that century, just after Grace had emigrated, but people were disparaging Irish people throughout that century. They were a down group, and both she and James McDermott were members of that group.
I'm going to have to try and hurry this along, because we don't have you for as long as I'd like. But I do have a couple more questions from our Facebook and YouTube viewers. First question, this one's an easy one for you, Sarah, asking about where the filming took place.
That was all around Toronto. So some of it was in St. George, Ontario. We were in Hamilton. Some of it was in downtown Toronto. There was a lot done sort of surrounding, all within sort of driving distance of Toronto. I feel like I'm missing some
Black
key
Creek
places.
Pioneer,
Black Creek
Pioneer Village.
Thank you very much.
Popular tourist
Where I
destination.
almost boiled to death in my Victorian
I
tour.
heard. Well, you had to subject all the actors to it, so I think it's fair that you suffer now that you made everybody
Some
else.
of them had cotton. I had wool.
Oh.
It was 90 degrees.
We wanted the sweat to be authentic.
Well, I played some character called Disapproving Woman, and they wanted to make sure I was really disapproving.
So Margaret has
very,
a
very
cameo
hot.
in the show. And
I do.
so, yeah, there
Kingston
you go.
Penitentiary also. We
Oh,
showed the Kingston
wow.
Penitentiary. Yeah.
I have a comment from Bill Hong, who says, 2 of the very nicest people I've had the pleasure of working with. Bill
Nice.
Hong, thanks,
Thanks,
Bill.
Bill.
And Carlo asks, how does Margaret feel about Bruce Miller's adaptation of The Handmaid's Tale?
Well, Bruce, again, wanted to do this ever since he was 19, and he kept watching to see who had the rights and if there was a possibility, and he leapt in, and he said he really had to make a case for himself, because he's a man. But he did make that case, and then he hired a bunch of women for the writing room, and thought they would be in consensus. Guess what?
Because we always agree with each other.
Always,
That's what women
always.
do.
Yeah. They're just, one is like another. So that didn't happen, but they had some interesting conversations. So I'm in communication with him quite a lot.
Oh, really?
And, well, I'm a quotes consultant.
Okay.
Doesn't mean anybody does what I say, but I do get consulted. And every one of the changes that he'd made, such as starting it in modern times being now, not at 1985,
Right.
all of those were discussed, and they all had a reason for them. So naturally, I've been part of those discussions. I was even allowed into the writing room, but before they had actually written anything on their whiteboards, so that I
That's
wouldn't
good.
actually
Smart.
see anything. Yeah, they're very tight. Of course, they don't want any leaks.
Yeah.
So I think they've done a splendid job, and I'm just extremely lucky to have such two very talented teams working on two of my books, and in a way they're joined at the hip. So
Yeah.
Alias Grace, Where We Were, Handmaid's Tale, Let's Not Go There.
Yeah, exactly.
So-
Cautionary tale.
So enjoy the moment. You're not in
Yes.
either of those places.
We have a question from Rufo who asks, I guess, well, both of you can speak to this. Every evening, Canadians are given a straight dose of murders on TV. What will make this different, Sarah? I guess if we just look at this as a murder mystery.
So real murders, do they get a dose of, or
I'm
made up ones?
I guess they get real and fictional. But
I feel this is. I feel what's been interesting for me about watching people watch the whole series is they spend the first 4 or 5 episodes wondering if she did it or not, and by the 5th episode they don't care anymore. That what has taken over for them is this study of this character in this time, in this place, and the many different versions of what might be true or not true, and that inability to pin down the truth. So it's much more about this fascinating woman, and it happens to have this, incredibly tense, set of events around it. But I don't think it's murder in the way we're accustomed to examining it.
Yeah, murder in the way we're accustomed to examining it is then you find out who did it.
Right.
So in this one, it doesn't end like that. It was also the high age of spiritualism, and it was pre-Freudian psychology and psychiatry, which very, very interested in those days in multiple personalities and somnambulism.
Yeah, one of the fascinating aspects of the series are these extended interviews between the Doctor and Grace, and that's kind of one of the ways, I guess, you retain that ambiguity while still kind of bringing us through. We have another question for Sarah. Now, Sarah is the writer on this and producer. She didn't film, but the question is, do you prefer film or digital photography?
It's a really good question. I would say that I'm coming around to digital, but that was hard for me. I was late to the game, and I was very, very much missing film. I still miss the thrill of the moment of 60 people standing around. You're putting very expensive film through a camera, and that moment matters, and everyone's holding their breath.
The sound
It's
of the camera.
so thrilling.
Yeah.
Like just that feeling that it's precious. It's not so precious anymore. You can just keep going. It doesn't cost anything. Like that thing of reporting how many feet you shot. Like I have a lot of nostalgia for it. I liked the care with which everyone did everything before digital. But I have to say, like, what you can get performance-wise when you can go again right away and right away and right away and let an actor go and let takes run endlessly, especially independent film where you don't have endless budget for film stock. It's amazing to me where we've come. So I've become a big fan of digital. I still think there's a texture to film that I'll always miss. But
Are you going to be traveling to the Emmys on Yes.
Yes.
That's so exciting.
Yes, I'm excited.
Will you be sitting at the table with the Handmaid's team? Or
Is it tables?
or are there tables or seats? I don't know.
We don't
I've
know.
never been to the Emmys.
I think it's in a theater.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
And-
how do you feel about the
am I going with you? I don't. This is an inappropriate time to ask.
Next year.
Can I pretend that I did The Handmaid's Tale and just sit next to you? Because people get confused. They're both
Well,
books
Graham's
of yours.
next.
But you'll be there next. Yeah, it'll be fine. We have a question from Lane Kerr who says, is there a possibility of the Madame series being adapted to film or television, and will there be a season 2 of Handmaid's Tale? I think they announced that,
Yeah.
didn't they? Yes, they did.
Season 2 is starting to shoot next week.
There you go.
Wow.
So we
Yeah.
answered
Yeah,
that.
they're starting.
And will you be a part of deciding the fate of Joan.
Joan. June.
Oh, June, right.
Oh, June.
You said-
Yeah,
okay,
yeah,
June.
June.
Okay, that makes
But
more-
decide the fate of
June.
Joan while you're at it.
Right.
Decide
But you
all their
said-
fates.
I mean-
She got burned at the stake. What can I do?
But it's a fascinating thing now where Handmaid's Tale is kind of moving beyond.
Handmaid's Tale is out of the box.
Yeah.
You know, it's one of those things that has escaped from its initial covers, and it's out there. So
You're just watching it like the rest of us.
well,
here.
it's out there running around. You know,
Yeah,
people are
it's
dressing
really-
up their dogs and cats as handmaids and sending me pictures of them. This is now, you know, at every Christmas there's ads with Scrooge in it.
Mhm.
Well, the original Scrooge never anticipated being in such ads, but he is now, so we all know who he is. It's like that.
Now,
But to answer the question, yes, I will be part of the fate, but as
Mhm.
I say, I'm only a consultant,
right.
and nobody has to do what I say. Mad Adam is under option at the moment.
Really?
It is a large project. What will
Tell
come
people
of
who
it?
don't know what it is.
The Mad Adam trilogy begins with Oryx and Crake,
Right.
continues with the creepily named The Year of the Flood,
Right.
and finishes with Mad Adam itself.
Mhm.
So it is another you don't want to live in this future story.
Margaret,
Wait.
you're hot now. You're in demand.
Isn't that strange?
It's
Um,
beautiful.
Yeah, so, and there's more to come.
Alias Grace doesn't have kind of like the iconic visual quality of The Handmaids, but how do you hope that this series speaks to our world right now, this moment?
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's a really important thing to look back where we came from, especially in this
Mhm.
moment where our rights are precarious and the world as we know it is very precarious, and the things that have been so hard fought and hard won are precarious. I think it's a really important time to look back at where we've came from, and I do think it's wonderful that The Handmaid's Tale and Alias Grace have come out in the same year so that we are having a conversation about where we've come from and where we could be going. I think that's a really interesting space to explore and also to take nothing for granted.
And
Mm.
guess what? They both got in them. Bonnets.
They've both got bonnets. So much bonnets.
All right, bonnets, and with bonnets we are going to say goodbye.
Thank you so
Hopefully
much.
we've whet your appetite for all things Grace and Margaret. Thank you so much for joining us. You can keep commenting below on YouTube and Facebook, and do tune in when when does it all go to air? Why don't you give?
September 25th on CBC.
There you go.
Gave
Yeah.
me horrible nightmares, I have to say. It's very powerful.
Oh, well, that's a
I
testament.
don't mean nightmares when you're awake. Handmaid's Tale gave me those.
Right.
When I was asleep, it gave me
Really?
nightmares.
Even
Yeah.
your own
Even-
watching
even
watching
my own,
the miniseries.
Even my own thing.
It's fascinating. From the seed and then the interpretation and then... All right, we're going to continue talking about the artistic process, but thank you so much for joining us, and do tune in when Alias Grace hits the air. All right, we're going to politely talk to each other while we wait for the all clear.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Hey, no, this was great. We had... I
You're
can
going
keep
to
going,
go
but-
down in history as having said.